Hello students, I am Mrs. Ambika K from the Department of Management. Today I am before you to discuss the subject export management. Before I go into the introduction to the international trade, recently a mall opened up near my home. I thought, why not go for a shopping? I completed my shopping and booked a taxi to go for a movie. And after I watched movie, I went to purchase the groceries. While purchasing the groceries, I made payment with the help of debit card. And in the movie theater, I bought a ticket by paying through online app. Did I go by a taxi for free of cost? No. I paid to the taxi driver with the help of cash. And in the shopping mall, I paid through credit cards. Now, students, what are these activities? These activities are called as trade. Trade is an activity of buying and selling of goods for money. Did money exist before thousands and hundreds of years ago? Let us move on to the medieval and ancient time. During this time, man wandered from one place to another. He wandered from one place to another to satisfy his basic necessities. His basic necessities were limited to three things, that is food, clothing and shelter. We, the human beings, our wants are unlimited. We have umpteen numbers of wants. He ate fruits and animal meat for his food. He covered his body with the help of barks of trees and leaves of trees. He lived in a cave for his shelter. And over a period of time, he was bored of his wandering life. He thought he will settle in a particular place and start growing his own crops. He started a settled life and started growing his own crops, which was sufficient for his family and to feed himself. And later on, he also decided to grow these crops at a huge quantity so that he can exchange these goods to another person. Slowly, they started exchanging the goods from one person to another person. This was the exist of barter trade. For example, there was a potter and there was a wheat seller. Potter wanted a wheat and a wheat seller wanted a pot. Pot seller sold his pots to the wheat seller and wheat seller sold his wheat to the potter. So there the exchange of goods started taking place between one person to another person. And I also remember that my mother is to sell all the old clothes and buy utensils. And there was a problem. She was not knowing how much cloths to give up to purchase one utensils. So she decided that if money was exist, it would be very helpful for her to decide the value of goods. Then money came into existence. And today also we can see that without the exchange of money or without the payment of money, no trade would take possible. Now let us move on to the types of trade. Students, there are types of trade has been classified into two types. First one is internal trade and external trade. Internal trade is also called as domestic trade or it is also called as home trade. Internal trade refers to the trading activities or exchange of goods which is taking place within the country or inside the country is called as internal trade. Internal trade is further classified into two types. They are wholesale trade and retail trade. Wholesale trade refers to purchase of goods from the manufacturer or from the producer and supplying it to the retailer. Here, the wholesaler purchased the goods in the huge quantity and the profit margin in the wholesale market is quite high because they purchased it in the huger quantity. Second one is retail trade. Retail trade refers to selling the goods to the ultimate consumer. Here, a retailer purchases a commodity from the wholesaler at a higher price and sells it to the customer. Here, the profit margin in the retail market is quite less because they purchases in the lesser quantity. Let us move on to the second type of trade, that is external trade. External trade is also called as international trade, or it is also called as foreign trade. External trade refers to exchanging of goods and services between two different countries. The trade was taking place between two different nations. External trade was further classified into three types. They are import trade, export trade and interport trade. Import trade refers to purchasing of goods from the foreign country for the domestic use. For example, India purchases petroleum and crude oil from the country like Iran and Iraq. This is called as import trade. Second type is export trade. Export trade refers to selling of goods from the home country to foreign country. For example, India produces cotton and these cottons are sold to foreign country. It is called as export trade. Third trade is interport trade. Interport trade refers to importing the goods from one country and exporting the same goods to another country. Here, the activity of import and export is to take place. Students, let us move on to the next topic, that is difference between internal trade and international trade. First one, immobility of labor and capital. Factors of production like labor and capital are freely mobile within the country. The problem of legal and other restrictions do not arise in the case of internal trade. While labor is immobile between the countries due to differences in language, custom, high transportation cost and labor immobility. Similarly, mobility of capital is also restricted at the international level due to political uncertainty, imperfect banking system, number of legal formalities, etc. So, there is no free movement of labor and capital at the international trade. Second point, different currencies. Use of different currencies is a part of international trade. Changes in the value of currencies will have favorable and adverse effect. And number of foreign exchange problems also arises in the case of international trade. Due to these hindrances, there is no free flow of goods from one country to another country. But when it comes to internal trade, the difference of currencies do not exist because the trade is taking place within the same country and the currency dealt is also same. Third one, differences in national policies. Each country is an independent sovereign state. It can pursue independent policies with refers to movement of goods, wages and price. Artificial barriers such as tariffs, quotas, import duties will also hinder the free flow of goods and services between one country to another country. But in internal trade, there are no differences in national policies. Fourth point, differences in price. Due to immobility factor, there are differences in the price of commodity between one nation to another nation. Changes in the price of a commodity is very common in an international trade. But in an internal trade, differences in the price do not exist. Fifth point, differences in a legal system. Different legal systems are followed by different countries. Due to different legal policies, it becomes very difficult for the task of the businessmen to complete the activity of international trade. But in an internal trade, there are no differences in legal system because the trade is taking place within the country or inside the country. And the last point, high transportation cost. High transportation cost at the international level is very common because of differences in the geographical boundaries. In the case of internal trade, there are no high transportation cost charged. I hope students you have understood the concept. Now it's a time for questions. First, what do you mean by trade? Next, what are the types of trade? And then, what are the difference between internal trade and external trade?